Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video we're going to be talking about Taunt, because I personally do believe that Taunt is one of the most overlooked abilities in the game currently, and it's mainly because it doesn't have any visual effect on the fight. When you activate Taunt, nothing realistically happens. Opponent doesn't start bleeding out, or you do not see a chunk of their health go missing, or you do not see, I don't know, any kind of like visible impact on the fight. However, it is something that works in background, and therefore it's also quite easily to be missed. And also, when you read the description of the Taunt, it's very simple. It simply states that opponent is more likely to act to X%, more likely to activate special attack, and they lose X amount of their attack depending on what kind of like Taunt strength your champion has. But all that being said, it effectively has very large implications in the fight at large and how the fight is likely going to go. So first and foremost, before we actually get into the 7 champions, that's right, Taunt is only available for 7 champions in a game where we have 170 plus champions, so that effectively would mean it's available to like less than 5%, about 4% of the champions have Taunt. So I'm going to go over all of them a bit further on in the video, and I'm going to try and explain which kind of like Taunts are more potent. This video is not going to be about those champion overall kind of like quality, but mainly about the quality of the Taunt and the way they can utilize it. So first and foremost, let's just get something out of the way. So the simple fact that opponent is much more likely to throw the special attack ensures for a much smoother fight. You are much likely to end up baiting out opponent's special attacks, thus dashing backwards and forwards. And in itself, that is an action that has quite large margin of error, as in it's one of the major kind of like times in the fight when you typically get hit. Other times would be when you miss intercepts or miss away the special attack, but this in particular, the process of baiting out a special attack is pretty much one of the biggest culprits where people end up getting hit, because whilst you're striking the opponent, everything's fine and dandy, you don't have much to worry about. The problem of the actual fighting typically starts when you're dashing in forwards, holding your block, kind of like trying to get that special attack out of the opponent, and that is one of the biggest reasons why you end up losing the fight or just making a mistake. So having Taunt active basically will drastically reduce the amount of time you end up dashing backwards, forwards, trying to bait out opponent's special attacks and kind of like get rid of that most annoying part of the game. Therefore, any fight whilst Taunt is active will be much more enjoyable and will give you a lot less chance for error, due to the simple fact that you will be able to spend more fight on the offensive, and less of the time is going to be spent of you trying to bait out opponent's special attack, and that in itself has very like large implications. Some of the applications, for instance, would mean that nodes like encroaching stun, where timers are a thing, where you need to get your special attack in X amount of time, like nodes like Plague Mind, nodes like Tranquility, that are all going to activate in X amount of time, and basically you have just that time given to you to kind of like fill your bars of power or achieve your goal of the fight. For instance, encroaching stun would be like a perfect example, in a sense that you do not only need to make sure that you have enough power to be launching special attack at a time encroaching stun timer would expire if you don't want to get stunned. You also need to make sure that the opponent isn't throwing special attack in that period of time. So the node in itself kind of like enforces the idea that you need to be able to gain at least 1 bar of power within 20 seconds, and also like bait out opponent's special attack in order not to have to take the risk that opponent is going to be throwing his special attack during that time. So quite frequently it's a very tall order to do in an average fight, and that is one of the reasons why encroaching stun is an annoying node and nobody likes to fight against. Obviously, outside of an obvious solution, and that is bring in a champion that is stun immune like Nick Fury, the best approach to that is to make sure that you are either using a power control champion that can flat out eliminate all opponent's power, like Magic for instance, or bring in a champion that has Taunt, because if opponent is more likely to throw special attack immediately, that will give you more time to attack, fill your own power bar, plus obviously he is likely to dump his power. So even though Taunt does not have any direct influence on and crouching stun as a node, it significantly increases your chance of actually getting through the fight well. Additionally, Taunt, for instance, can counter all or nothing, which is not insignificant, which is one of those nodes that typically always requires a specific counter. You either need to be able to tank the special attack with like Iceman, or you need a power control champion, or if Taunt can be used as a substitute for power control here, because you do not exactly need opponent to have no power. You can still let them gain power so long as they do not actually store it up to level 3. You're fine, and Taunt can ensure that opponents will throw their special attacks prior to the point where they reach level 3. So it's also one of kind of like less mainstream counters to all or nothing nodes. Additionally, any fights where you deal with increased power gain in opponents or opponents that have increased power gains like Hyperion, obviously we all know that the best way how to deal with Hyperion is power lock him or have a consistent access to power drain. But at the same time, Taunt can do just as good of a job in the said fight, because you kind of make sure that you will have Hyperion cooperate with you, and he's far less likely ever to reach those 3 bars of power, because if he's taunted, there's a massive chance that he will drop his special attack given the first opportunity. And same goes for improved power gain nodes, same goes for like increased power gain nodes. The easier opponents throw the special attacks, the easier these nodes become to deal with. Obviously there are some exceptions to those rules if opponents throwing special attack is something that you heavily want to avoid, but in a generic setting, Taunt is an excellent counter to increased power gain and opponents' abilities that let them access increased amounts of power. And lastly, another underlooked factor, and especially important, I believe, in today's kind of metagame where opponent values are so inflated that even parrying hurts a lot. And Taunts reduce opponent's attack significantly. An average Taunt reduces opponent's attack by 40%, which is a large amount, which is close to half. So being able to almost half opponent's attack, or if you have like Resonate Mastery active and an equity, then even further, then reduce their attack by over 50%, obviously ensures that you take far less chip damage, or if you do happen to slip up, you have far more chances to actually make out of that mistake alive. So Taunt, I hope I help prove to you now that Taunt is fantastic. Taunt is extremely underrated, and Taunt shouldn't be overlooked. It's a massive benefit to any and every champion that does have Taunt available in the game. So now if we're going to jump to the game, first champion that I want to demonstrate is Nitrous. Now Nitrous is one kind of like my underdog favorites. I do absolutely like this champion. I use him frequently, and there are many great qualities associated with this guy. But first and foremost, we're going to take a look at the Taunt, which he does have to be awakened to access, and basically he can access it via his heavy attacks. When he drops a heavy attack, he has a 35% chance to activate Taunt on opponent, and if he does, opponent loses 40% attack, as I mentioned before, and gains a 70% chance increase of throwing special attacks. So basically, with Nitrous's playstyle being such where you kind of want to spam your heavy attacks quite frequently as is, and stacking up gadget debuffs in any average matchup where your power isn't being limited and you are able to have access to your level 1s, it's quite easy. And typically Taunt is going to be present throughout the majority of the fight whilst using Nitrous, because that is also part of his ramp up mechanism. So his Taunt, objectively speaking, is extremely potent, largely because he's tanky, he gets his debuffs quickly, and he can basically make sure that the Taunt is active for pretty much the entire duration of the fight. So I personally look at his Taunt as one of the best available in the game. But that being said, obviously there are only 7 champions that do have Taunt mechanics. Speaking of probably the most popular champion that does have Taunt available to him, we have Stockman Spider-Man. And Stockman Spider-Man, I think at this point everybody knows how I feel about him. I'm not a big fan of him at all whatsoever. I think he's extremely outdated, but this video is not about my feelings about Stockman Spider-Man, and I do apologize if there are any Starkey fans watching. Point being is, his Taunt is actually probably the best one, because for every 5 hits you place a Taunt on your opponent, and that's it. You basically just, as long as you attack the opponent, the Taunts will keep on coming. You can refresh your Taunt if you dash back and stay still for a bit, but base idea is every 5 hits you convert one of your points charges into a taunt. That is the way how you normally lose your points charges, so therefore you need to keep refreshing them. But in an average fight, once you have gained some of the points charges, taunt is going to be active for the majority of the time, especially if you are up against a villain opponent where the duration of your taunt is doubled. Now, original duration is not too long. Let me just find it. It's only 3 seconds, so it is quite short taunt originally. However, against villain opponents, it's increased by 50%, so that is more significant. But the fact that he can apply it extremely frequently at the end of every combo typically means that that is also going to be the time when you want the opponent to throw their special attack. So those 3 seconds actually are kind of like more convenient than people realize, because yeah, after you have finished your combo, which typically is going to be 5 hits, taunt gets activated, and those are often the times when opponent is past the bar of power, which is what you want to bait taunt, and that is when taunt actually kind of like presents its usefulness. So yeah, it is extremely potent kind of like taunt delivery system, and probably the kind of like most reliable taunt in the game, arguably definitely in the top 3 there. Next, we're gonna discuss a champion that I think is heavily underestimated in the game, and that's gonna be Emma Frost. And Emma Frost accesses her taunt via heavy attack if she is in telepath form. Now, the beautiful thing about that is if you are not in telepath form, your heavy attack basically generates no power in the opponents. And that means, once again, can we read that exactly where? Passive heavy attacks diamond form generate 50% additional power, so that's going to give you a lot of power, and your opponents generate 80% less power. So effectively you can spam your heavy attacks up until any given time where you kind of outpace their power gain, because you're going to be gaining a lot more power and opponents will be gaining hardly any power. And then in telepath form you have 60% chance to taunt the opponent for 5 seconds, and that is extremely kind of a useful mechanic, which I have demonstrated in my Emma Frost's review video, which I made a while ago. But the point being is, Emma Frost is one of the very few champions that can conveniently decide which special attack you want to taunt out of your opponent. You can effectively pick and choose whether you want your opponents to throw special 1 or whether you want them to throw special 2. You can play very defensively, you can use your heavy attacks, push opponent to whichever attack you want them to get to, and then taunt them, and then you can bait it out. Now, it's not a taunt that's going to be present for majority of the fight, because heavy attacks is not the kind of like typical Emma Frost playstyle when you want to stack up prowess and deal the damage. However, the fact that it is available to you, and pretty much at any given point you have a choice which special attack you want to make, I think makes it an extremely versatile version of this taunt ability. Unfortunately, that does mean that you do not really get the benefit of reduced attack for most part, but Emma Frost can be extremely tanky lady by herself, and that will get us moving on, and I'm going to try and pick up the pace. So one of the newer additions in the game that does have taunt available is Mr. Fantastic, and Mr. Fantastic has taunt on his level 1s. So one of the absolute plethora of debuffs available to him, and it is also as potent as any other. Once again, here we go. Special attack 1, 40% attack reduction, 70% chance to increase chance to activate special attack, and it is guaranteed to activate on your every level 1. Also, Mr. Fantastic's abilities kind of increases his power gain, decreases opponent's power gain, thus also making sure that this taunt, should it be needed for you, is pretty much always available for you. And Mr. Fantastic is actually an absolute powerhouse if you add on like Resonate and Inequity masteries, because you're going to be spamming a lot of debuffs on opponent. So the attack reduction from taunt and Inequity and Resonate is actually going to go to kind of like pretty ridiculous levels, and you will hardly take any damage, because like 70 to 80% of their attack is actually going to be reduced, which I personally find quite funny. And yeah, so therefore Mr. Fantastic is also a perfect example of how taunt can be used to further your own kind of gameplay and agenda, make that fight smooth, make sure that you can always drop those heavy attacks to refresh your pre-fight abilities. And yeah, I really do actually like Mr. Fantastic on the low-key. I think he's one of the most versatile and amazing champions in the game. He just needs his time to shine. And moving on, we have a couple of mutants that I didn't mention yet. Now, Gold Pool For whatever reason, Gold Pool has kind of like the baby version of Taunt. Now, it is relatively easily to access. It activates automatically on every 20 hits on your combo meter. However, it only increases opponents' chance to launch special attacks by 20%, and it reduces their attack by 35%. And the idea of this Taunt is quite simple. It's just that he is well, heckling his opponents, and he's swearing at them, and he's making them angry at him. But nonetheless, it's still something that's available to him, and he can refresh this Taunt, I think, with heavy attack. Yes, heavy attack allows to refresh an active Taunt debuff, so again, you can maintain it for a large amount of time. However, the fact that it isn't as potent as the rest of them does kind of make it a bit not as great. Now, how talking Mr. Fantastic, Gold Pool, another champion obviously to speak about, and I think this is one of the abilities that many people overlook into Domino, is Domino's abilities. Now, unfortunately, the Taunt here is available only on level 2, and only when opponent is unlucky, so you cannot Taunt tech champions, because tech champions never get unlucky, and it's way more dependent on RNG. So when it comes to the specific ability to Taunt the opponents, I do not rate Domino high at all, because it's extremely conditional. It's not something you can see too often, because yeah, it's level 2. It's not like you consistently shoot level 2s back to back to back like you do drop regular combos. And additionally, your opponent has to be unlucky, so it's extremely RNG based. So it is available to her. It's just a bit of a failure of how they chose to implement it, in my opinion. For instance, Emma Frost is polar opposite, because her Taunt is actually very useful, because it offers you a lot of control and choice. And with Domino, it's kind of like all luck, no planning, no base. So when it comes to Taunt, it's not Domino's strong suit. And obviously, the last champion that I do have to mention, it is technically counted with opponents that can Taunt, but it would be SheHulk, because every Fury increases the chance that opponents will launch a special attack by 15%. So arguably she can have the most potent Taunt if you stack up, let's say 5, 6, 7. At 7 Furies, basically you would have 105% chance, so opponents will pretty much immediately try to launch special attack in vast majority of the cases. And yeah, SheHulk's Fury mechanic is effectively a Taunt. Super helpful, however, it does not reduce opponents' attack by anything, so that is a small drawback. And obviously that she cannot refresh her Furies against skill champions, so utilizing this Taunt is going to be tricky as well. And her Taunt, since it depends on how quickly you can ramp her up, is also RNG based, and it's not like guaranteed thing to happen, because there's only 11% chance per hit for Fury to activate. Sometimes you end up going for like 20-30 hits in a row without a Fury. So for instance, it isn't as easy to be applicable, for instance, on all or nothing nodes. However, that slower ramp up time can be partially compensated by her Petrify on level 2, which can basically slow down and slightly reverse opponent's power gain effect, so on and so forth. So she still can be extremely useful in a lot of matchups where opponents are gaining a lot of extra power, and that quite often actually makes the fight much easier for her. And I think another opponent that I was about to leave out and I had completely forgotten about was Gulk and his Face Me, because if I'm not mistaken, Gulk's Face Me also has an increased chance of opponent throwing special attacks, and I had absolutely forgotten about it. Chance. Yes, here we go. Now, Gulk's Face Me. Hulk becomes enraged while under the effects of cowardly passive damage or time effect. While enraged, Gulk gains X amount of attack, and chance the opponent will trigger a special attack plus 70%. There we go. I knew it was there. So yes, effectively Gulk would be champion number 8 in the game, I think. That has effectively access to Taunt. It's not directly a debuff, and it has very specific activating conditions, but it still can obviously be utilized in similar fashion if you can trigger the Face Me. So Gulk is another champion who has very conditional access to Taunt, and obviously, as always, any and all useful things that Gulk has lies in those 3-4 lines of text in Face Me. But that is pretty much it. I think we are done here for now. I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. If you did, then, well, there will be Baby Yoda in it for you. See, there we go. He's taking a drink from his tiny little cup. And yeah, if you guys did find this useful, or if you possibly learned something new, then hit that like button, hit that sub button, hit all the buttons, and stay tuned for more. But that is me done for now. If you didn't like any of the stuff that you heard in today's video, you are more than welcome to leave. And yeah, I'm done. See you guys soon.